I'm currently improvising my very own hand-knit hood. Not a hood attached to a garment, just a hood that is separate and worn around the neck and pulled up over your head to keep you warm and snuggly. And in that process, I'm realizing that I have some key considerations for my preferred hand-knit hood style. And so for today's video, I'll be sharing with you those 7 key considerations, as well as 7 corresponding patterns that you can find on Ravelry that fall into the category of my preferred hood style. So if that sounds like just your cozy dose of knitting content, let's get comfy and dive in. Hello, and welcome to the Wool Needles Hands Midweek Ramble. My name is Taylor, and I will be your host. I've done that intro about 5 times. I cannot promise my hair is in working order at the moment. It's probably frizzy, and I don't even know what. But I will be wearing this hood that I have on throughout the duration of this video because today we are talking about hoods. Now, this is not one that I've knit myself. This is one I recently purchased. And if you want to know all about that, check out the recent episode of the Knitting Podcast that I released on Sunday. But for right now, I want to dive into some considerations I have or that I'm making or that I'm developing in terms of my preferred hood style, because I am right now improvising my very own hand knit hood. I'm starting from the bottom up, kind of going based on the style of this hood that I'm wearing here and some styles of hoods I've seen on Ravelry and creating my very own improvised hand knit hood. But there's things that I'm realizing I'm focusing my attention on or that I really would like to see in this hood in terms of design elements and things, of course, that I don't want in this particular hood in terms of design elements. And so I want to do today, and I have all of this in front of me here in my notes, I want to share with you 7 considerations I have right now and some corresponding patterns that highlight those considerations when it comes to my preferred hood style. And when I'm looking down over here, I'm looking at my notes, and I keep all of my notes on a platform called Milanote. I'm not sponsored by Milanote, but this is to tell you that if you are a member of the Patreon, you have access to all of my notes for the show on Milanote in a very visual, kind of dynamic way. You can have all of the links all in one place. Now, I'll provide all of these links in the description box under this video like I always do, but those of you that are members over on Patreon, thank you so much. You have access to all of these Milanotes over there as well that comes with your membership. Okay, now before we dive into the patterns, I want to talk a little bit about what exactly I mean by a hood. I think a lot of us think of a hood and we think of just something that goes up over the head that's attached to a garment, and that's pretty much it. And really, for all intents and purposes, that's usually where we see hoods applied, and we see them attached to garments in hoodies and various different things like that. But there's a trend. I want to say that this trend kind of started in terms of more recently in Scandinavian countries, where they were just knitting hoods with cowled sections down here that cover the neck, but it is a full-on, for all intents and purposes, hood that goes over your head that's not attached to anything else. I kind of like to think of it as like the hooded version of the dickie. It's a partial garment that serves one particular purpose without the added bulk of all of the other aspects of that garment, traditionally speaking. So a hood, in my definition, is a piece or an accessory that is shaped to go over your head that does also have a section to keep your neck warm. You can also think of it as a hooded cowl. Now, there are 3 different things that might come to mind when you mention that you're going to be knitting a hood that goes around your neck and then up over your head, but is not attached to a garment. Some folks might think of a hooded scarf or a snood, or perhaps they're thinking exactly what you're creating, which is just simply a hood. And there are some distinct differences, and I want to lay those out here because in my last video, when I mentioned that I wanted to make a hood, somebody had mentioned to me that they've heard it referred to as a snood. And I get that. I've actually heard similar things, but here are some distinct differences between a snood, a hood, and a hooded scarf. A snood is essentially a tubular scarf. Think of a large cowl that sits around your neck. It can be pulled down over your shoulders and it can be pulled up over your head so that it could essentially cover your neck and shoulders and your head at the same time. It is tubular. There is no shaping there that allows it to fit over the head, making it just for the head's shape. It is a tube, if you will, but because of how generous it is, it can be pulled up over your head and worn as a hood. But again, for all intents and purposes, I feel like this is going to be something I say a lot in this video. It is just a tube of knitting. And I like to think of it as like an oversized cowl. A scarf with a hood, or a hooded scarf, is just that. It is a scarf, just like you would imagine it, long strips of fabric, except right in the center of that long strip of fabric is a section of knitting that has been shaped specifically to meet the needs of a head in terms of fit. So you can wrap the scarf around your neck, and then right back here at the middle of the scarf is a section that is shaped to fit over your head, a hooded scarf. And then of course you have the hood. This is separate from a garment, and I kind of feel like it could be maybe a hybrid between those two previously mentioned hooded scarf and snood, except it doesn't have anything, there's nothing about it that is scarf-like. There are no long ends. You are knitting a section of fabric that is intended to go around the neck. Some may be more generous than others, providing a really nice cowl piece, but then you're shaping it very specifically and intentionally to fit up and over the head as an actual practical hood. So when you see pieces like this, you will be able to notice that it is definitely knit to be a hood. It doesn't just so happen to fit up over the head like a snood does. It is shaped intentionally to be a hood. And some things like this might have drawstrings to help cinch in the hood around the face a little bit more. It kind of, if you were to put a jacket over the top of it and then pull the hood up, it would look like you're wearing a hoodie under your jacket. So that would be a hood. Very distinct, separate section that is shaped specifically for the head. So to kind of summarize all of that, a snood is a really generous cowl that can also be pulled up over the head. A hooded scarf is a long scarf that has one section in the middle that is shaped to fit over the head, so you can wear it just like a scarf with a portion that comes over your head. And then a hood has a small cowl neck section, and then a section kind of like a hooded scarf that is shaped specifically for wearing over one's head. Now, the hood that I'm wearing today, like I mentioned, is store-bought. And what I really love about this is it does have a very generous cowl section down here. It's not super open, so it doesn't drape over my shoulders, but it's lengthy. It's about 7 inches long before you start shaping out for the hood, and it sits on my neck really nicely. And then the hooded section of that, which is what I have right here. This section is so nice and generous. The hair is not going to get any better, guys. I'm sorry. But the hood is so nice and generous that it kind of serves as a little bit of additional bulk for the cowl. So it's kind of sitting on your neck. It rises up a little bit like a nice funnel. But in the back here, it sits over my shoulders like a hood. And then if I pull it up over my hair, it's really going to get bad. Just like this. Look at this, you guys. I'm getting some Stregonona vibes here. But it sits over my head like this, but it doesn't pull away from the cowl. So if I turn to the side, you can still see that there's plenty of cowl right down here covering over my back. And that would kind of go under like a jacket or over. It doesn't really matter how you want to wear it, but it's like this. So it has a cowl section, and then this section is shaped to fit over my head. Okay, here we go. Moment of truth. The static, I don't know what it is, but the magnetic, what did they call the static electricity in the air the last few days has been really atrocious. We're gonna do our best here. So this is the one I purchased at the store. I absolutely love this. I love the style of it. I love the shape. If I had to change one thing about it, I would just open the cowl up just ever so slightly more than it is now to give a little bit more room. But other than that, I love this piece, and I want to replicate this for the most part in a hand knitted item for myself. And that is where my 7 considerations come in. I was thinking a lot about it. What is it that I'm looking for? When I go through Ravelry, looking at all of the hoods that they have there, what is it that I'm looking for? And here are my 7 key considerations when I'm picking out my preferred hood style. The first thing that I'm thinking about is a nice lightweight fabric. My ideal fabric weight or yarn weight in this particular case would be DK, because I prefer to knit DK over fingering, but it's a little bit more heavy than fingering, so you can work things up a little faster, but it's still considered a really lightweight fabric. This is a very lightweight fabric, albeit this is obviously machine knit to a small gauge. I don't really want to replicate that because that would require very small yarn and small needles. So I think a nice DK weight fabric would suffice. And there is a pattern by Breelyn Fair called the Knitted hood pattern. And this kind of gives you a little bit of an example of a nice lightweight fabric. This is a DK weight design. There's a lot of kind of nuance to this design, and there are some things here that I'm not really going for and some things here that I really love, but in particular that DK weight fabric, the lightweight nature of that is what I really love. And this is really a beautiful hood. The next thing I'm after is a nice, generous cowl section. Like I mentioned, the cowl section of this one here is a little bit more close fitting than ideal for me. However, I do like this. It's nice and neat. It fits well under a jacket, but I would love something with a little bit more of a generous cowl section. One really great example of this, and this is an awesome pattern all around for a really just basic hood, is the Friends of the Forest hood by Gretchen Tracy. This is a classic stockinette stitch hood, no ribbing really going on here, but it has a really nice generous cowl. It sits over the, well, it doesn't sit over the shoulders, but it sits on the shoulders nicely. It comes down over the front, it comes down over the back, and then you have your really nice hood. I like a little bit of a generous cowl around the neck. I think it's flattering, and I also think it's comfortable. You know, you could wear it over any type of garment without worrying about it being too stifling. I put in my notes here, and this is really important. I feel like the cowl should fit like a wide funnel neck and not like a turtleneck. I'm very much turned off by hoods that have cowl sections that almost look like turtlenecks. And ribbing in that area, ribbing in this section, unless it sits out really nice and wide at a relatively open gauge, I don't want any ribbing here. I feel like that would be very stifling and maybe a little bit more dense than I'm after. And like I mentioned in that first consideration, I want the fabric to be nice and lightweight. The next consideration I'm thinking of here is a hood that doesn't sit too snug around the face. We're going to do this again just to show, but this one here, I can wrap it over my head and I can actually like bring it pretty far forward. Like if I want to be really like secretive, I'm getting, that show South Park. Who was the one? Kenny, what's his name? Kenny? Kenny was the one that had like the what was that kind of coat? The parka? Those like parkas. He had like a parka that would go over his like face. And so when he turned to the side, you didn't see it, just kind of looked like a periscope. Almost. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting here. It's like a hooded periscope. This is too much. This is too much. I mean, unless you're in a blizzard, you don't need it to come out this far, but it's nice that you have the option. But I like that it doesn't like squish my face. Like I can kind of give it there's hair under there, right? But I can kind of give it a little bit of room. I almost think that this might be too close fitting, maybe. But not too much. Like, I mean, real Stregonona vibes going on here, okay? And that's okay depending on your climate. But this is where drawstrings could come in really handy because you can adjust. So like on a drawstring hood, I have one here called the Kenny hood, and this is by Svetlana Selivanova. But I love this because it's nice and open around the face, but she has drawstrings there. So if you need to cinch it closed, if it's snowing or really windy and you need that extra kind of protection from the weather, you have the option. But otherwise, I want something that sits around the face with a little bit of room there. You don't want something like really like stifling. I don't know. It's not my thing. So let's go ahead and do this again. Oh, goodness gracious. So not too snug around the face is key. And actually I do have an example of this, the Simple Knit Hood pattern by Lisa Licca. I really like this one. I feel like it's just around the face, gently snug. There's definitely some space there, but it's not overly tight. It kind of fits really nicely around the face, and I like that. I apologize. I said Lisa Licca. No, it's Leah Licca. Yeah, and I like how her hair is kind of like peeking through too. It's really pretty. Now we're talking about size here. We're talking about the space around your face. And this leads me to the next point, is that I would like the hood to be moderately sized. I don't want a really small hood, really close fitting. I don't want it to be like a balaclava in terms of like a ski mask where it's like sits over everything. I'm not going for that. I want something that's a hood that's kind of nice, has a little bit of whimsy, not too much whimsy, but a little bit of whimsy, fits over the head, and it's got a moderate size to it. The Harris hood by Cheryl Mokhtari of Cocoa More Knitwear. I shared this one on my last episode of the podcast. This is a very generous hood size, maybe even too generous, but I'm using this as an example here because I like the style. I feel like it has a nice casual vibe, but it's still very chic. It might look larger in the picture than it actually is, but I think it's very lovely. You can really pull it down. It doesn't cinch in on the face at all, really. It's just very much a hood, almost like a cloak hood, if you will. But I like the idea of a nice, generous hood. I don't want something so big and cloaky that it comes off like costumey, like you're wearing kind of like an accessory for a costume. Like I don't need Harry Potter vibes with like the hood, but something a little bit more generous so you aren't absolutely destroying your hair every time you put it on. And this one I don't think does. If anything, it just makes it really staticky. But yeah, so something nice, generous, but not overly generous, not oversized to the point of being costumey. Like I said earlier, I'm really after something that has very minimal to even no ribbing at all. Now, there are some exceptions to this, but overall I feel like ribbed fabric in a piece like this can make it very contrived and seem very dense and form-fitting, and that's not what I'm after here. Ribbing just has that tendency. It cinches in, it provides structure, I don't know, it provides like elasticity, but it can sometimes give a little bit of a rigidity that you don't want in something that's supposed to be casual and easy wearing and kind of, I don't know, not too stifling. Now, some exceptions to this. If the ribbing is really minimal and maybe somewhat loose, then that could totally work. If the ribbing is done similar to how Cheryl Mokhtari does it in the Harris hood, where you can see that it's working as like an edge and it's folded over, so it has that nice rounded edge. It's more of a design element than an actual functional, practical portion of the design, and so it's okay in my opinion. But anything with like ribbing around the cowl, where the cowl is primarily ribbed fabric, I'm not into that. So I would really like something that is minimal to no ribbing. An example of this, and it's kind of an exaggerated example because I feel like the fabric of this particular design is much heavier than I'm after, but that is the Mica or Mika hood by Suzanne Mueller. This one shows that there is raw edges, or there's no ribbing at the edges, because you can see that it is rolling in where it comes around the face and also at the base of the cowl. So there are rolled edges there because there is no ribbing to reinforce those edges. I like that style. I like the way the rolled edges look. I feel like the design, the fabric looks a little dense to me, and everything is a little more close fitting than I'm after. But overall, that design, if you were to make it in a lighter weight fabric or a lighter weight yarn and then open everything up a little bit more to provide some more space, that's a really ideal look to me. I really love that. So that's the Mika or Mica hood by Suzanne Mueller, and it really does emphasize kind of that look, that classic style that doesn't have any ribbing. Okay, the next consideration, something I was thinking of, is texture. Do I like texture? Would I include texture in something like this? And if you know me and if you kind of know the things I knit, I don't knit with a lot of texture. I love stockinette stitch items. I think it's because I love classic pieces that don't, I don't know, where like the piece itself is the highlight and not necessarily the texture. That does not mean I don't like textured garments. Don't get me wrong at all, because it's just not the case. But I tend to gravitate towards things that don't have a lot of texture. Part of that might be because I don't want to have to knit all of that texture, but a big part of me that is because I just like a classic stockinette stitch fabric. I'm not sure. So I like the idea of a textured hood. If you're going to have something textured, in my opinion, or I should say if I'm going to do something textured, I would want that texture to be very minimal. Scratch that, not necessarily minimal, but small scale. Whatever it is, I want it to be repeating throughout the entire fabric and small scale. I'm using an example here. This is the Grandma Core hood by Veronica Lindbergh. This is a little like skirting the edge of too much. And the texture here is really just lace. It's a beautiful lace motif. It's a little more than maybe I would want in a hood for myself. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that it's this blue color. If I were to do it in a neutral color or like a maroon, maybe I would be more into it. But this is just an example of how you can see it's an all over lace texture. It's somewhat small scale. You kind of just have like little lace leaf patterns going up. But ideally, it would be even smaller scale than that. But I do love that. And I have to, throw one out there from Veronica Lindbergh, because she just has such a fun, whimsical style. And I think for those of you that really love texture, or you really love lace and you want to knit yourself a hood with those two elements, that's a really good one for it. So I feel like for me personally, if I'm going to incorporate texture, I want it to be a small scale pattern, and I want it to be repeating across the entire hood, not like a cable panel, down the hood. I want it to be relatively all over. Okay, and the last consideration here, and this kind of goes along with the first consideration in terms of the fabric, but I want the gauge to be relatively loose. A nice loose gauge with maybe a little bit more of a dense yarn, something with a little silk in there, maybe a little alpaca or cashmere, that gives the overall hood a great drape. You want it to fit up over your head with a little bit of weight so that it drapes down over. Not too much weight. You don't want it to pull on things, but you want it to put over your head and have a little bit of a weight. This is 100% cashmere, and it has a little bit of that weight. It's a little bit more lofty than like an alpaca or something that includes silk, but it has a little bit of drape. Well, it has a lot of bit of drape, and it has some nice weight. So when it wears over the head, it kind of sits there and drapes nicely and in a flattering way. So something with a lot of drape. And the one that I have here as an example, this is, I think what I love about this is just the way that this style looks in terms of drape. And this doesn't have a name. It's PTO, whatever. It's a Lang Yarns Cashmere Premium pattern. There's no name of this. PTO 013_13. I don't even know, but it's super cute. It has a very generous opening for the face, but I love that drape. I like the way that it's coming down in the front. The ribbing on this that you can see down at the bottom of the cowl there actually works really nicely because it's really nice and drapey, and there's a generous cowl portion. So I love drape. I want the gauge of the fabric, and I what is this? This is knit using a DK weight on a size 6 needle. Yeah, that's going to give you a nice gauge for some really drapey fabric. I would say that a DK weight yarn would typically be knit using a 4 or 5 needle, sometimes even a 3. So if you're popping all the way up to a size 6, you're getting a nice drapey fabric. And I think that that's really nice. So other than the fact that this doesn't really have a name, I think it's a really great example of something that's really nice and drapey. Okay, now as a quick bonus and before I go, I want to share with you how I found how I filtered my search results to find hoods or things like hoods to sift through for my own purposes and for the purposes of this video. So I'm going to record my screen here and pop it up so that you can see what I did in the search on Ravelry to find lots of patterns that kind of fit these categories. So we're going to head over here to Ravelry right now. I am right here at the pattern search section, and I'm just going to click for right now on advanced search. We're just going to do an advanced search. Now I filtered this down. We're going to go over here. We're going to start with accessories, and I filtered it down. I wrote this down so I would know. I went to hat, and then I clicked balaclava. Not because I'm after a balaclava, but because I feel like if you start going this route, you're going to get lots of things that kind of loosely fit into that category. And so I'm just trying to, I'm like hedging. Is that hedging your bets? I don't know. I'm trying to give myself the best chance here. So that was all I clicked, is just balaclava. And then after that, I went to neck and torso, and I did, what did I do? Cowl. Yeah, cowl right there. And then I went over to other headwear, and you could, I didn't want to narrow it down too much, but I wanted to make sure that most of the elements were there in my search. And then I went over to other headwear. I had done snood, and you can do that if you want, because there are some folks that tend to think that what I'm referring to as a hood, it qualifies as a snood, so those might fall into the right category. But the second time I did this, I didn't click snood because I just was inundated with cowls. And so I didn't want to have that. But I did, oh, well, if that's the case, then I don't need to do other headwear, but that's an option. Okay, then I went out of this, and because we were talking knitting today, I filtered it down to knitting. Then I went down, I wanted a lightweight fabric. So I did DK Sport and fingering, but the first time I did this, I didn't do anything because I don't want to narrow it down by fabric weight yet, because I feel like a hood is one of those things that you can kind of really change up the weight of the yarn and adjust your needle size and just check your gauge and come up with something that, modified by you based on your own desired fabric, regardless of what the pattern says. So I wouldn't narrow it down all that much. And then I went all the way back up to the top and I typed in hood, just like that. And that gave me the results that I sifted through to not only curate the content for this video, but also to give me some ideas for my own hood design. So all of these here, for the most part, are going to be things that you can use to, like, you're going to get stuff like this that just doesn't really fit the bill. And then of course you'll get like the hooded scarf occasionally, but you'll get ideas, you'll get inspiration. Like, look at this. How pretty is that? I didn't include that one, but that's beautiful. It has that rolled over ribbed edge there that I think it works in terms of ribbing, but It's lovely. See, this is considered a balaclava. I don't consider that a balaclava, but this person does. And so I don't want to miss out on seeing this by not including that in my search. I'm going to add this to my hoods bundle. There we go. Well, that is it for me today, guys. I hope that you found some inspiration here for potentially future hood projects. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you took value from today's video or enjoyed yourself at any point, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up, definitely subscribe, and click that bell icon so you can be notified anytime I upload new content, which is every Wednesday and every Sunday with an occasional video thrown in from time to time. Until we meet again on Sunday's episode of the Knitting Podcast, happy knitting, happy making, happy whatever it is that you're doing. Take care, be well, and I will see you soon.